Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Mary Lenigan, and I'm the editor of Total Telecom. I'll be monitoring today's session for you. The session today is on Convergent Charging and Policy, Empowering the Digital Telco Transformation. The session is sponsored by Oracle. The webinar will last for about an hour with a Q&A session at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, you can do so via the Q&A box on the side of your screen. Any questions that we don't get to during the session, don't worry, they will be passed on to Oracle to be answered after the event. If you have any problems accessing the webinar, please send us a quick email to ads, that's ADS, ads@totaltele.com. On today's webinar, we have Richard Hallett, Senior Director, BSS Product Marketing, who's responsible for Oracle's Convergent Charging and Policy solution. But first, I will hand the call over to our first speaker, Chetan Sharma, President of Chetan Sharma Consulting and one of the leading strategists in the mobile industry. Chetan, that's over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, hi everyone. Good morning or good evening, wherever you're joining from. So the things that I wanted to cover today are around digital telco transformation. As you are well versed that a lot is happening in our industry. There's a lot of consolidation, there's a lot of transformation and competitive threats from all around, and as such consumers are looking to operators and service providers to offer them better services. I'll go through some of the trends and also what does it take to become a digital telco, especially from the charging and policy point of view. While that's going on, let me just go over some of the basic structural issues that are going on in our industry. As you know, the main revenue resources or sources of revenue for the industry have been traditionally in voice, messaging, and data services. For almost all operators, they're looking at how either to extend the revenue curves or enhance in a way that benefits the future generation of services for the operator. And in most of the Western markets, we see that voice revenue curves have plateaued and are declining. Even in some of the emerging markets like China and even in India, these revenue curves for voice have peaked and are declining. Same goes for messaging. Once the IP messaging came into play in 2007-2008 timeframe, we have seen since then a number of countries experience peaking of the messaging revenue curve. And obviously the growth story for the industry for the last 3-4 years has been around data and data services. And both in emerging markets as well as in Western markets, we have seen that data has been a primary source of revenue. So much so that in countries like Japan, it's contributing 80% of the overall revenue, and in the US, close to 62% of the revenue comes from data. So data clearly is going to be the growth provider for a number of years to come. But like the past curves of voice and messaging, data too will peak and it'll start declining at a certain point. As such, operators have to invest in new service models and new service applications, and what I call the fourth wave, which is designed around new services and new business models. And there too, operators have different roles to play. They can play a role of an access provider, or they can play a role of an enabler in terms of a platform provider, or they can bring solutions directly to the market, as some of the leading operators have done worldwide, like AT&T, NTT Docomo, Telefonica, Vodafone, and so on and so forth. So that pretty much defines how operators are thinking about growing their revenue. You delay the decline of the previous curves, you extend the peak of the data curve, and you invest in the digital curve. Now behind that, obviously, there's a significant platform layer that enables you to manage all of that, whether it's voice, messaging, data access, or the digital revenue curve. And the other aspect that's critical for the market is the lack of new customers. And so if we look at Western markets, and like all mature industries, you see that the amount of revenue coming from new customers generally trends to zero. And that happens market after market. And so emerging markets, so this is the slide I was talking about, where you have different revenue curves, and operator strategies are essentially defined how they manage these revenue curves. And this slide kind of shows the progressive decline in revenue from new customers. And so, and that's true for this slide is from the US market, but that's true in most of the Western markets. And as such, operators have to rely on new strategies to create revenue from existing customers by offering more services, better capability in terms of providing more granular and personalized services to the customers. And as such, these two strategies have a defining effect on how the revenue gets generated in the mobile market. And so if you look at the largest market by revenue, the US, you see that the digital services are already making a big impact on the overall revenue base for the industry. And just comparing 2013 to 2014, the biggest growth was seen in terms of absolute dollars was seen in the digital revenues that were generated. And so much so that digital revenues surpassed access revenues in the US market. And we'll see that progressively across all geographies. So this means that the way you do charging, the way you do billing, the way you do policy management has to accommodate these growing trends. And we are starting to see significant digital uptick in countries like Japan, in some countries in Europe, Singapore, in the US, Canada, and so on and so forth. And progressively we'll see that in other markets as well. Even markets like Kenya, where M-Pesa has been a roaring success, we see that services and applications are increasingly making more revenue compared to voice and messaging. And so in the case of Docomo, the digital revenue contributes 20% of the overall base. And remember, 80% of the revenue comes from data services, including digital. And so it's not a non-trivial revenue stream for the operators. But you do have to retool and rethink your network and platform architecture to be able to take advantage of these trends, because the competitive landscape has significantly changed. It's not only your fellow service providers that operators have to worry about, it's the larger ecosystem, the Googles, and Microsofts and the Facebooks of the world. Along with, and it's not just competition, it's an opportunity to collaborate as well. And so unless you have a system in place that allows and enables new services, operators could be left out. But the most fundamental, I think, mind shift that needs to take place is around how these services are sold and communicated to the end user. Typically, most common framework that operators have had in the past, whether it's prepaid or postpaid, is around tiering of customers. And depending on the tier, you could have a bundle device, network, and service plan. And typically, the high tier is insensitive to price. They more care about service and network, whereas other tiers are more sensitive about pricing and what kind of devices they can get from the service provider. However, if we change that mindset to look at solutions and a lifestyle experience way of communicating the services, then the equation changes. Meaning every customer that walks in or touches the operator, you have a very personalized way of communicating the offers, communicating the services, and just communicating the ecosystem that's built around the operator. And if you do that, then you have better chance of success in maintaining loyalty over the long term. So, for example, if somebody is as a health enthusiast and also wants to track a lot of the things, watches sports, certain packages can be built around those services that can be offered to that particular customer. And similarly, so essentially you build a very personal profile of a customer and offer solutions that match that the personal needs of that customer. And if you do that, then you have a seat at the table as the industry is moving towards more and more towards digital. So the basic telco architecture is on the slide. You have network, you have innovation platform, you have apps and services, and the critical component that enables apps and services is around the platform, whether it's CRM, analytics, charging, rating, and billing engine, understanding the policy and rules engine, making sure that authentication, security, fraud prevention are inbuilt into the platform so that applications don't have to worry about it, or the services that are being built, whether it's financial or healthcare or retail, they don't have to worry about some of these things. And focus more on the user experience of their application or service. That's beneficial to the ecosystem. And then, and I think more fundamentally, an ability to create and onboard new services is critical. Instead of taking months to launch a new service or get a new partner online, it has to be done in a matter of hours and days. And once you have that framework in place, then an operator can reap bigger benefits from the digital economy. And Richard will go deeper into some of this in his presentation. So the basic tenets for a successful digital telco are that there needs to be a digital solution provider mindset, that beyond just access for voice and messaging and data, you're providing a suite of digital solutions, whether they are your own or they are through your partners. And obviously, an operator cannot participate in every vertical industry. It's just too cost prohibitive, but they can be an enabler to pretty much every industry. And in some industries, they could offer solutions directly to the customer. And that's what we have seen around the globe. Operators have picked certain vertical areas where they want to invest in, whether it's entertainment, health, retail, energy, entertainment, and so on and so forth. And they have invested accordingly and try to gain momentum as well as start new revenue streams. At the basic, most fundamental level, it's because of the IP convergence. Once you have the IP layer, everything else becomes an application and service on top of it. And so that's happening. That happened with voice, with VoIP, and now it's happening with VoLTE. It happened with messaging, with IP messaging, and we'll see that happen with every other industry, meaning that every other industry is trying to figure out a way to use mobile so that it can transform itself. And we are seeing significant implications across the board. Example, Airbnb, Flipkart and Snapdeal in India, others in Alibaba in China, and so on and so forth. And they are fundamentally using a mobile infrastructure, IP infrastructure, to enable a lot of commerce and a lot of user traction. And so to have these digital solutions, you need to have a platform framework in place. And the key components of that are convergent charging, meaning that you should be able to provide charging capability to your own solutions as well as to your ecosystem. And as you know, as customers are getting new services from the operators, they could be in different modes. So they could be a prepaid on one device, postpaid on another, could be using some kind of sponsored data on the third one. And so there could be multiple modes of engagement from the same customer. And if you have a convergent charging framework in place, it's very easy and quick to launch new services or new plans. And you can even react better to the competitive landscape. And so if somebody else in the market launches a new service on a certain set of plans, you can respond fairly quickly. Along with that goes policy management. And so policy management essentially goes hand in hand with charging. Policy helps control how the charging flows through the system and provide a set of rules that helps manage the network. And it's things like bill shock or parents trying to manage the bills within the household or across devices can use the policy management framework to get alerted or just manage their daily or monthly gigabyte usage. And third one is quite important as well, where you have these digital services across different channels. And these digital services could be home security, they could be connected cars, and essentially they can use the same basic framework platform to enable these services. So as you put your car onto a data plan, the system should be able to just take that as another endpoint that needs charging and policy management service, irrespective of what that endpoint might be. Similarly for healthcare devices and so on and so forth. Obviously, you have to figure out ways to manage the revenue so that there is no revenue leakage. You have better view into what customers are responding to, and an integrated framework of charging and policy enables you to do that. The final point is around just the bridging of network and IT worlds. For a long time, these two worlds have lived independent of each other, but they clearly are converging. And network components and the network frameworks in the telco world are taking advantage of what has happened in the IT world, especially around cloud and security. And so a lot of the components in the OSS, BSS can be done more efficiently using cloud services. And so some of the best practices from the IT world are getting embedded in the network and in the network world. And if you see a lot of the SDN and NFV initiatives from leading telcos, that's the reason why, because they want to take advantage of faster growth and moving quickly from ideation to launch of services in a matter of days. Finally, so you say, well, this is all good, but what are the steps? How do we go about becoming a digital player and digital telco, more specifically? I think one of the basic steps is around a common charging and policy layer, which enables you to better serve the customer and provide more granular view and control of how they use the services across the board, whether it's voice messaging or data or any other service. And some customers might be just using digital services, and the system should be able to allow for that. And by exposing the platform via APIs, you do two things. One is it helps better integrate with legacy. Clearly, you cannot just switch into a new platform overnight. It's a transition. And so by having the APIs available, not only you have a better approach to progress towards a convergent charging platform, but also you expose that to the rest of the ecosystem, which has probably much more value in terms of they can take advantage of some of the charging and policy controls that an operator network provides. One of the biggest promises of digital roadmap is around analytics and how analytics can be fed back into the process, so that in real time you are understanding how the customers are behaving, and if there are issues around the network usage, or there are issues around the quality, or just the satisfaction about some services, an operator can quickly react, or by extension, the rest of the ecosystem can quickly react, and as such can prevent churn in real time. Obviously, convergent charging enables new services, and that's what will help operators become a true digital lifestyle service provider. So that's fairly quickly. I think it's very important for the telecom providers and their ecosystem to look at digital in new light, not as something that's threatening, but as an opportunity. But to do that, the infrastructure needs to be ready and be prepared to offer these digital services. So with that, I will transition over to Richard Hallett from Oracle.
Thank you very much, Chetan. So what I'm going to do is actually build on Chetan's analysis and really delve a little more into the specific areas of monetization and some of the challenges around that. So if you could move on to the next slide, please. So there's really three key areas I want to focus on in my section of this webinar. So really, first of all, talking about some of the service monetization challenges, particularly around IP and data-driven services. You know, the focus of this webinar is all about the digital transformation, the digital experience, and that brings a number of quite unique challenges with regards to how service providers can actually make money and be profitable from these technologies. A really big theme that I would like to focus on is this whole concept of the user experience. Now, customer experience, user experience, call it whatever you will, has been a topic that has been talked at great length right across the industry and indeed across many industries. But particularly with regards to digital services in the communications space, we really believe that customer experience is still very much the revenue growth engine going forward for service providers. And there's a particular angle to that, which is really using the end user device to really enable a rich and interactive user experience. You know, certainly from our discussions with service providers, that is really a big way to help mitigate some of the challenges that Chetan mentioned with regards to revenues sort of remaining flat or declining in certain areas. Finally, I also want to talk about some of the technology impacts, particularly in the BSS domain, business support systems domain, because actually the industry has been talking about this concept called convergent charging for the best part of 20 years. I know I certainly have. And what we're seeing now is that this move to digitization is really driving service providers to start looking at convergent charging extremely seriously now, and actually, you know, we're starting to see, you know, significant shifts in industry thinking towards convergent charging. So I also want to talk about the technical aspects and also mention, you know, some of the key topics such as network functions virtualization that Chetan alluded to, cloud technologies, virtualization, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of different aspects to this, but I think the really key thing is ultimately focusing on the end user experience. That really I think is you know, is supreme above everything else. So if we look at the digital service monetization challenges, Chetan has covered an awful lot of this in greater detail, but it is of course extremely important to understand that, you know, obviously data data usage is exponentially rising. We all very much live now in the digital world. There is also an increasing number of internet service providers, application providers, you may call them over-the-top providers, that are offering services that compete with traditional telecommunications offerings. And the question there is this an opportunity or is this a threat for the traditional service provider? We're also seeing margins declining, particularly from traditional services like voice and messaging. And overall, in terms of data revenue, service providers are looking to dramatically increase data revenues by a factor of X, where X is a significantly larger number. And so all of these challenges, sorry, if you could go back to the previous slide, all of these challenges are not helped by the fact that the industry is obviously very mature. Apologies, having some slide ordering issues here. Some of the industry systems and processes are very embedded, so there's and quite siloed. So typically there is an operational silo for, say, B2C. There's an operational silo for B2B, for mobile postpaid, mobile prepaid, fixed line, and so there are fragmented business systems, processes, and channels across all of these different types of business. A good example of that is the inconsistent view of customer types from a payment options perspective, so prepaid and postpaid. So the prepaid world has traditionally, had quite different types of services and offered different types of services to its users from their postpaid counterparts. Now, a lot of that is down to technical reasons of how prepaid systems work. But the bottom line is that they've traditionally been segmented as quite separate end users, and service providers are now seeing that the same need for real-time control that prepaid users have traditionally had are now extremely important for real-time postpaid data users as well. So there's an inconsistency in terms of the service offerings, and there's an inconsistent user experience. So the other interesting aspect to all of this is really how service providers are competing with some of the well-known digital brands that we all know very well. How can a service provider really put their brand right at the heart of the customer sort of inner circle of all of these different brands, be they social networking brands, digital commerce brands, media and entertainment brands? And there's a key element to that, which is also really how can a service provider cater for the multiple personas that everybody has. So we all have different aspects to what we do in our daily lives. We could be at home, at work, at play. We often have multiple devices. How can a service provider actually look at appealing to specific, a specific user's persona at a specific, moment in time? In other words, be a brand in their inner circle of brands, if you will. And another angle to this is really moving from the way that traditional telco services have been sold, and considering how the impact of digitization on this. So if you think about it, I would say traditionally the customer experience has generally been determined by not a one-size-fits-all, but a one-size-fits-many selling approach, where there are a fixed number of commercial offers, specifically tailored to a relatively well-defined set of customers. Now that's been fine for the worlds of voice and messaging, but the huge diversity in data and IP services means that actually this may no longer be the most optimal approach. In other words, just telling customers what they can buy. And this is also compounded by an often inconsistent approach to how services are actually bought by the end customer. Whether an inconsistent cross-channel experience, for want of a better term. So whether you're ordering from the web, whether you're ordering via IVR or at a retail store. It's very, very different. And excuse me. And the other angle to that is again this lack of support for the multiple customer personas that traditionally leads to quite poor offer uptake, because they are not necessarily targeted to a specific to a specific user's sort of particular persona at that moment in time. So this traditional selling mode, I think, is something that service providers are really trying to sort of move away from in general. Now, this is also compounded by a large number of sort of more technical and operational challenges that really come as a result of the maturity of the telecommunications industry. So as I touched on earlier, there are traditionally multiple silos, both at the IT and business layer and also at the network layer as well. There are typically multiple charging and billing systems. There are multiple prepaid IN platforms and core network elements, and there's multiple customer channels. And so, this makes it quite difficult for service providers now to really start moving towards this more sort of persona-led device-based approach. Now, the other angle as well to all of this is that in addition to this siloed approach, it's not just a technical issue. There are also organizational barriers in many service providers. So taking the example of the prepaid domain, this has traditionally been managed by the network team, whereas a postpaid billing system has traditionally been managed by the sort of IT and billing side of the world. Now, what we're seeing now, as I touched on earlier, is this need for real-time control for online charging is becoming more and more important now for postpaid users. So this means that these, not only do, from a technology perspective, do we have to look at a more harmonized charging layer, but from a business perspective, there needs to be optimizations that take place, from a business process perspective. We're also at a very important moment in time from, just from where we are in the technology world. And I think we all know all of these different types of technologies, but they are having a fundamental change on how communications systems, both core network and charging and policy systems, are actually being deployed. So, of course, computing is more powerful than ever, and Moore's law will dictate that is still set to continue. Mobility, of course, now is ubiquitous. So again, this really ties into what I was saying earlier around having a consistent channel experience, a consistent ordering experience and care and control experience, wherever you are, whenever you are. And the other interesting aspect is virtualization. And this is totally transforming the industry. So technologies such as network functions virtualization, where you're essentially taking a core network function and virtualizing it so it can elastically scale on demand, are really transforming the way that charging and policy systems and core network systems are evolving. And of course, cloud is, as a part of that, is also disrupting the landscape. It's changing both the way that this technology works. It's changing the way this technology is operated and the way that it's actually deployed. So with all of this, we're seeing that communications is now very much becoming driven by the flexibility of software. An answer to this problem of this traditional selling-led approach is to really have a sort of paradigm shift into the opposite of that, which is a user-centric buying-led approach, where all of a sudden the user can almost become their own product manager in a sense, where there's a much more relevant and abundant choice of, for want of a better term, smart offers that can cater to these specific customer personas. And the key to this is actually using the device as an order channel, as a control channel, and as a care channel. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean with these three types of characteristics shortly. But really, again, enabling almost the ability for users to go and really pick and customize and tailor their specific offerings just for them. And that is really the essence of the digital transformation from with regards to the impact of monetization. Just to give an example, here are some example smart offers where all of a sudden what you're doing is offering a much more interactive and relevant customer experience. So it could be that you are a social media heavy user and you want unlimited access to your 5 or 10 favorite social network sites without paying the data bearer charge. You may be a frequent traveler, like many of us are, and would like a particular type of international roaming pack. You may be a gaming addict and you want high bandwidth for certain of your favorite online games. The point is that these types of offerings really all combine network and charging policies, and network policies, charging policies, business policies to offer this much sort of richer set of service offerings. And this is enabled and can be enabled by a convergent charging and policy architecture. So what do I mean by convergent charging? Because this is one of those terms that convergence has been used by the industry for many, many years and can mean all manner of things. But really my definition of convergent charging is, first of all, a charging layer that can charge for any type of service and business model, and also from any payment type. So if you think about the traditional mobile prepaid domain, that typically uses an online charging mechanism. Now, online charging basically means it's pre-delivery service control. In other words, you don't allow the service to continue until there are certain funds available. Now, the traditional way of charging for postpaid usage is what's called offline charging. In other words, the core network generates a set of event records, and they are then fed to a billing system. They're guided, they're rated, the balance is impacted, and the bill's created after the event. Now, convergent charging, therefore, is really about having a single layer that can do integrated online charging, offline charging across mobile, fixed, cable, and any type of digital commerce and any type of business. So it really can mean all manner of, it's a broad term that can mean a single charging layer for all types of services. Specifically focusing on the device-driven customer experience, there are a number of key capabilities for data services, which is, first of all, the ability for the user to have control over their usage. So I think Chetan, in his section, mentioned about bill shock. Now, this has been a well-discussed industry issue where users don't want to all of a sudden be presented with extremely large bills because they didn't know how much data they were using. So in order to help mitigate that, an online charging architecture, similar to the wireless IM prepaid world, the traditional world, is very, very important. So online charging is very, very important for giving the user much greater control over their spend. But what's really interesting is where you can actually combine policy and start doing more than just prevent bill shock, but actually give users the ability to want to spend more and to have highly personalized and interactive services by giving them the options to control which services are used by certain individuals in their social group, on which devices, the ability to have personal insight. So a lot of is made in the industry of big data and business intelligence, but actually also there's an angle about how it's very important for the end user to see what they're spending per month and the types of services they're spending on and the usage patterns. So a convergent charging architecture, which is really bridging the network and the IT domains, can really help enable those type of services. And then finally, also the ability to actually extend the service experience to a user's social group and social network, whether that's a personal network, whether it's a work network. That can also be a great viral marketing channel for the service provider. So combining charging and combining policy can really help to enable a much greater degree of richness of end user services. Now, the next slide I'm going to focus on is actually talking a little bit more about some of the core sort of network terminology and technology behind this. So there's quite a lot of acronyms here, and I'm a network person, so I tend to always fall back onto the acronyms, but I'll try and explain them. The key thing, first of all, and this shows an example LTE and VoLTE network context, and it's a very simplified version of this. But the key thing, first of all, is that charging and policy, network policy, are very much two sides of the same coin. So if you, again, to take the example of a traditional mobile prepaid call, you allow a call to continue because there's available balance. That's one type of policy. It's a financial policy. It's very similar to actually invoking a policy which says increase Richard's bandwidth, for the next hour for this particular sporting event, for example. They're both types of policies. One is more network focused and one is more charging focused. And the 3GPP, Third Generation Partnership Project, which really drive the standards in this area, have recognized that, and the policy and charging control architecture is really a testament to the fact that they're very, very, very closely related and joined at the hip. So this example here shows a VoLTE and LTE core network. You have on the left, you have the air interface, the RAN, the EU-TRAN. You have the actual core, the core network, the EPC, the Evolved Packet Core, and then you have the service delivery network, which in a VoLTE and LTE scenario is typically delivered via an IP multimedia subsystem framework, or IMS. Within this, you typically have a very important function, which is something called the PCEF, the Policy and Charging Enforcement Function, which is the bottom call-out box there. And that is really essentially an IP router in simplistic terms, which is used to control the IP packet flow. And that is responsible for a number of things from the monetization perspective. It is responsible for actually generating online and offline charging events and records into a charging system. And it is also responsible for communicating to another function, which is called a PCRF, a Policy and Charging Rules function, which is used to actually install rules in the PCEF to determine the IP session treatment. So, for example, if you wanted to drop the user bandwidth from 2 meg to 128K due to a fair usage policy, the PCRF, the policy function, would essentially communicate to the PCEF to say, right, can you please install this rule to reduce the bandwidth? And what that will do, that will then translate into all of the layer 2 components and and parameters, the diff serve code points and allocation and retention priority and all the other acronyms to help reduce the flow. The point is that both the charging and the policy are controlled by a convergent charging and policy framework here. So the bottom line is that for every VoLTE call, for every data session over a mobile call, there's a real-time charging request to go into the charging system, and there's potentially going to be real-time policy decisions that need to be installed into the PCEF to control the network and the charging treatment of that flow. And what this means is that at the end of the day, by combining these charging and policy rules, you're offering a much more interactive end user experience using the rich subscriber context that's held within the BSS system. So what I've not shown in this diagram is that there's a rich store of subscriber profile data in this top layer that can be used to drive very intelligent decisions and really help enable offers that are personalized to the particular user's persona. So that was just a quick example of one particular network context. There would be many more for a 3G UMTS architecture, for fixed line, for packet cable. But the concepts are very similar. Finally, some quick technical BSS considerations. I think I've covered most of these. But one of the key things, the key challenges that the industry has as I mentioned before, is somewhat of a decoupling at the moment between the network domain and the IT and commercial worlds. And there needs to be a single workflow across both of these departments. And I think that one thing that's very, very important is to really adopt a design methodology, so a commercial offer design methodology that decouples the complexities of the underlying core network elements from the commercial and the pricing considerations. Now, this is very much a model that has been embraced by the industry through initiatives such as the Telemanagement Forum, and it's something that's going to remain more and more important. So, for example, if you need to introduce a new network capability, like an LTE advanced type function, there needs to be minimal impact, or in fact zero impact, on the pricing layer, so that the product manager can then basically see this new capability and then actually go and and quickly launch a new LTE advanced type service. The other interesting opportunity, I think, as well, is for service providers to look at potential partnerships with the wider ecosystem that Chetan mentioned, which is looking at how you can have a secure API layer for connectivity with the OTT providers. Now, that could be by exposing a real-time payments gateway from an app store, so that everything appears on essentially on one bill, or it could be actually all exposing policy as a service, so that particular types of OTT content have certain prioritized QoS capabilities that would be managed by the PCRF in that network diagram I just showed. Finally, I spoke earlier about the importance of analytics and big data, not only for business but for personal insight, and actually providing actionable insight, so that there is a feedback loop from that analysis into actually into the charging and policy system to again enable real-time promotions that are relevant to the end user. And then from a technical underlying platform perspective, the sheer number of data events is only going to set to increase going forward. And so it's important that both the core network and the monetization layer can scale elastically and have flexible deployment models. Whether that's on-premise, it's more of a private cloud model, what have you. There needs to have, the technology features of virtualization become extremely important in that. And, again, talking about network functions virtualization, as online charging is essentially an extension of the core network, a part of the core network, as is policy, those are ripe candidates going forward to be virtualized network functions. And I think that the industry is very much going to move towards that, at some point in the not too distant future. So I'm coming to a close. There were just a few technical considerations, and I'll just close and summarize my section by really saying that, first of all, at the end of the day, this is all about the user experience, and we believe that actually, offering a much more personalized and interactive user experience that takes advantage of the multiple customer personas that we have in our dynamic lifestyles is really going to help mitigate some of those revenue challenges that we spoke about earlier. So, combine network and business policies to drive offer uptake using the device as a sales, care, and control channel, leverage customer social networks, and really start looking at how the network and the IT domains can start coming together. So with that, I will wrap up my section, and I appreciate your time for listening. These are our contact details, and I'm now going to hand over to Mary, who's going to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. But thank you to both of you, actually, for a couple of really interesting presentations there. We do have a few questions coming in and a few minutes in which to answer them, so let's go straight to that. One for you first, Chetan, if you're still on the line there. Could you expand on the new digital revenue opportunities for the service providers? So maybe you could just talk a little bit more about that aspect of your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, so I'll just use a few examples to illustrate what operators around the globe are working on. And so if you look at in the US market, AT&T and Verizon, connected car is a big opportunity, and M2M is a big opportunity. And Verizon should be reaching $1 billion in revenue with M2M and telematics by next year, and same for AT&T in connected cars. If you look at Docomo, which is focused on entertainment and the financial space, they are already generating $3.5 billion from digital services. And if you look at some of the emerging markets like Kenya and Philippines, you see that financial services are a big part of the digital services. In Kenya, Safaricom is already generating 20+% of its revenues coming from digital services. And so there are numerous examples, and these coupled with the traditional services of voice, messaging, and data allows a nice balance for the operators for future growth.
Fantastic, thank you. We have one coming in for you, Richard. Could you expand some more on the challenges you foresee operators will have to overcome in order to evolve to full convergent charging? And that's challenges both at the operational and business levels, please.
Yes, certainly, Mary. That's a great question, actually. And this is really at the, I suppose, at the heart of the transformation journey to becoming a digital business. It's absolutely non-trivial. If you think about a traditional service provider, they have got many years often of infrastructure that have evolved from when they started. They've more often than not merged with other companies, and so there's a large number of existing systems, both prepaid systems and often IN core network charging systems and PCRFs. So the key challenge there is to be able to have a gradual journey, a gradual evolution and migration towards convergence. It's typically not something that's just going to happen overnight like that. A lot of these systems are mission critical with regards to revenue. So a prepaid IN system is in the call path, it's in the session flow. And so any disruption to that is going to make an operator extremely nervous. So, one way to look at this is actually to start perhaps taking new types of services and putting in an infrastructure that can cater just for those specific services that can coexist with the existing, postpaid and prepaid and PCRF systems. So this approach of coexistence is very, very important. You want to make maximum use of your existing investments. If it isn't broke, don't fix it. And one way to do that, a number of ways to do that, is first of all a focus on the industry standards. So I touched on the 3GPP and the TMF. Those are both very, very critical standards bodies. That a new architecture should obviously adopt. So open standards is very, very important. Open data models. The other angle to all of this is in many ways slightly harder, which is evolving the organization. So again, starting to look at new ways in which the IT and the network teams and the marketing teams can actually work to offer some of these sort of more interactive digital offers. And that's something we're really starting to see in the industry. We're starting to see a lot of these departments come much closer together, in some cases actually merge. And so really it's a two-pronged approach. It's looking at how you can gradually evolve, introducing online charging capabilities on one side without disrupting your existing infrastructure, but on the other side also look at how you can optimize some of the business and structural aspects as well.
Thanks, Richard. Interesting times, certainly. We have another one for you, Chetan. Should operators focus on being an enabler or a creator of new services? That's a bit of a million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest question I get from the operators is around strategy on digital services. Should they invest in the platform, or should they go ahead and invest in some end user services? And I think the answer is that you have to look at both. Clearly, to be the creator of services, you need to be an enabler of your own services. But even if you choose not to be a creator in a certain vertical area, you can use the platform to enable other services and hence untap into some of the new revenue streams. And so on the platform side, some of the things that we talked about, charging and policy, but there are other areas like identity and security and cloud and similar services that take advantage of the network capability that can be used to enable both services for the operator as well as others. On the creating services front, clearly you cannot generate or go after every single vertical. You have to focus on select few and experiment and see what works in a given region or a geography. And so I think having a balanced approach of being an enabler as well as a creator of some services is probably the right strategy.
Thank you. We're starting to run short on time, but I think we can probably just squeeze in one more question. So I'll turn back to you, Richard. A lot is being discussed on IP services and the move to the digital experience, but how will existing circuit switch and SS7-based services factor into future service offerings, and what will be the impact on BSS systems?
Right, that's a very, very interesting question. And you know, SS7, so signaling system number 7, is still very much, you know, in use globally, controlling telecommunications calls. So the vast majority of, you know, wireless prepaid calls use SS7. They use something called CAP, Camel Application Part, which is the underlying protocol there, and it's still very, very prevalent. So yes, absolutely, IP services are here and they're growing and they're going to dominate, but there's still a large, you know, proportion of service providers and a large number of geographies where actually, you know, basic voice and messaging services are still very, very critical, and there's been a huge amount of investment that's been plowed into these SS7 networks. So going forward, it's very, very important to continue to support these traditional sort of TDM circuit switch type services in a convergent charging and policy infrastructure using SS7. What's important is, though, is not to have a siloed approach, so that you have, you know, a different subscriber profile and a different balance for you know, a circuit switch call versus an IP call. You've got to again abstract the network connectivity, the southbound network connectivity layer, from the core monetization engine. But I do believe that, you know, SS7 isn't necessarily going away anytime soon. It's always going to be relevant, you know, in many parts of the world, and so, you know, we will need to support that. Service providers will need to support that, alongside, of course, the you know, the vast growth in IP service transactions as well.
Great. We do have a few more questions coming in, but unfortunately, I think we're out of time. So, as I said at the start, we'll make sure those are passed on to the panelists to be answered offline. So it just remains for me to thank Chetan and Richard for sharing their wisdom with us today, and a huge thank you to our sponsor for the day, Oracle. Thank you very much, chaps.
Thanks very much, Mary. Thank you, Chetan.
Yeah, thanks.
And thanks, everybody, for joining.
Thank you. Goodbye.